Heneini. These are the words spoken by those to whom God has called. When God called to Abraham, he responded with the simplest response possible. Heneini, here I am. Yet the meaning of this answer is profound. Rashi says that it is the response of the pious, ready to do God's will. 4,000 years have passed since the time of Abraham, and now I stand before the world. And what else can I answer but Heneini? For I am the last generation that will ever hear the words of Holocaust survivors firsthand. Here I am, ready and able to protect and pass on these words to an ignorant and intolerant world. All my life, I've lived in the shelter of the Jewish community, away from the bigotry and violence of the rest of the world. As Jews, we have always cared for each other more than other nations, as over our post-exilic history, there have been many tragedies seared into our collective memory. Since the Romans exiled our ancestors from our homeland, we have lived as strangers, wanderers, alien others, in the lands we called home. And though we thought we were safe from tragedies, there was always some tragedy to remind us of the precariousness of our positions. Yet afterwards, we always survived and prospered. That is until 1934, when a shadow covered Germany that would spread over the rest of Europe, leaving death and destruction in its wake. My grandmother was born into an average middle-class Hungarian family in the 1930s. They, like most Jews in Europe, had emigrated from Germany many years before. They were fully accepted into mainstream Hungarian society until in 1944 the Hungarian Nazis, the dreaded Arrow Cross, took control of the government during the Nazi occupation of Hungary. My great-grandfather was taken to a work camp, while my great-grandmother and grandmother were forced into a Jewish house under the protection of the Swiss government. This government shelter was, unfortunately, unsuccessful in protecting them. One night, Hungarian soldiers came to the house in order to deport the inhabitants to concentration camps. My great-grandmother put flour on my grandmother's face in order to make her look sick, and in appealing to the soldiers' humanity, they were allowed to stay behind. They escaped later that night and managed to hide in an apartment with an elderly Hungarian woman for the duration of the war. After the Red Army liberated them, they tried to find my great-grandfather, but he had died of typhus in the camp. My great-grandfather Siller Kovacs was one of 690,000 Jews who were murdered in Hungary alone. My great-grandmother Martha Kovacs and grandmother Georgine Nash were two of 180,000 Hungarian Jews that survived the Holocaust. 70% of Hungarian Jews, loyal citizens, were murdered simply for their race. Sillard was one of over 6 million Jews murdered. Martha and Georgine were two of 3 million that survived. For my bar mitzvah, I was privileged to be involved in a very special program called the Twinning Project. It is run through the Sarah and Chaim Neuberger Holocaust Education Center. The premise is that you are twinned with a child murdered in the Holocaust that was robbed of the chance to become a bar bat mitzvah, and you share his or her life story in a short pamphlet. I was honored to be twinned with Hanan Romarovsky through my mentor, Anna Kremer. Hanan was born to a middle-class family in Vilna, Lithuania in 1930. In 1942, the Nazis captured Lithuania, and the Jews of Vilna were forced into a crowded and disease-ridden ghetto. Then in 1943, the Vilna ghetto was liquidated, and Hanan was taken to a concentration camp, where he was murdered. He was not yet 13. Telling this heartbreaking story still makes me sick to my stomach, and it should. It is a story of unrelenting sorrow. But I know that I will have to tell it many more times to a world that still, even with overwhelming evidence, refuses to accept the truth. In the 20th century, World War II and the Holocaust were still fresh in the minds of the world. Holocaust denial was never taken seriously then, as there were millions of witnesses to testify its validity. Nowadays it is different. There are far fewer survivors. According to the Simon Wiesenthal Center, 30% of Jewish youth doubt that the Holocaust occurred. How did this happen? Sweden is one of the most forward-thinking liberal democracies on the planet, yet the situation is much worse elsewhere. In the Muslim world, Holocaust denial runs rampant. Mahmoud Abbas, leader of the PLO, wrote his PhD thesis with the title The Other Side, The Secret Relationship Between Nazism and Zionism, which dismissed the Holocaust as a grossly exaggerated Jewish plot. And of course, no mention of high-profile Holocaust denial is complete without the president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. His entire regime, from the Ayatollah to the lowest member of Iranian society, has devoted itself to spreading anti-Holocaust rhetoric around the world. It is commonly known that anti-Semitism is on the rise. Hatred of the Jewish people is being spread across the world once more. In university campuses the world over, Jews are portrayed as baby-killing, blood-harvesting, evil demons that must be destroyed. Just look at Israel Apartheid Week. In today's tolerant age, however, people won't just come out and say the Jews are evil. They instead say the Zionists are evil. But what does that word even mean? The definition of Zionist in Webster's dictionary is an international movement originally for the establishment of a Jewish nation or religious community in Palestine, and later for the support of modern Israel. On many occasions when people condemn the Zionists, the word Jews and Zionists are regularly interchanged. The world now looks as if it could be ripe for another tragedy. In 2009, my family and I went on a trip to Israel, and afterwards to Hungary. While we were there, we went to the great synagogue in Budapest, which had escaped destruction during the Holocaust. In its courtyard, there is a massive sculpture of a tree with thousands upon thousands of metal leaves. Each one is engraved with the name of a Jew that had lived in Budapest and had been murdered in the Holocaust. After a lot of searching, I was able to find my great-grandfather Sillard's leaf. It was honestly one of the saddest moments of my life. And for the first time, my eyes were truly opened to the terrible deeds people are able to commit. I knew at that moment of the horrors that can and will befall the world if people simply forget the Holocaust, for no one will have the bitter reminder of what one man can do to this world. Each Pesach we are reminded of this. In every generation there have been those who have stood against us to wipe it out. But in the end, Hashem will save us. But the Ramban said that it is a sin to simply believe that God will save us, and that we must instead take an active role in fulfilling God's will. This is why I must stand before the world and tell the stories I have learned. We must record every single testimony given by survivors, and must listen to all who are brave enough to tell them. We must spread their stories around the entire world. We must teach them to our children, and have our children teach them to their children for the rest of human existence. We must work tirelessly so the world will always remember the greatest tragedy to befall not only Jews, but also all of humankind. For all the 6 million who were slaughtered were innocents. All deserved life over a death more terrible than any other. Next year I will be going on the March of the Living, and I will bear witness to the true extent of human atrocity. And as I stand before the gates of Auschwitz, I will say, Heneini, here I am, willing, able, and determined to speak unto the rest of the world, that they may know our stories, and the world together may prevent another such terrible tragedy from occurring ever again.